Once Our Lives is now my baby officially. I've given birth a 20-year pregnancy. And finally, you don't give up your children. Your child is here. Guess what? My son is 31. He's still my baby. My daughter is 27. She's still my baby. I would do anything to keep it going. It's like my husband said, you know, your own children, you all have to pay college education. This book baby, I'm not paying the book baby any college education, but I will be paving the way forward for its prosperity, for it to go into the world.
UnLost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. Qin Sun Stubis lived through starvation, state persecution, and the Cultural Revolution, yet never let go of her love of reading and the truth. After immigrating to the U.S. and building a successful life, she dared in her 40s to write a book she always wanted to write. The result is Once Our Lives, a powerful memoir that restored her family's dignity and fulfilled her childhood dream. Qin, welcome to UnLost Cause.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, David. And I also want to thank you for giving a very special platform for all the people who felt they had a lost cause and then they did something special in their lives. So it's a very, very special place.
Well, thank you. And one of the things, there's so much richness that I can't wait to dive into about your background. But before we go too micro, can you zoom out and just share with the UnLost Cause audience, maybe in 2 or 3 sentences, a summary of what your lost cause was and how you turned it into an unlost cause, so they have the context of where we're going to be going?
Well, there are 2 things. One was I love the literature. Ever since I was a little child, and I always loved books. And I went from reading very simple books in Chinese all the way to study English literature and Shakespeare, Spencer, Milton, Charles Dickens, Jack London, Louisa May Alcott, and I was an avid reader. But I never wrote a book in my life. I always thought writing was reserved for special people, and I was just not talented enough. And another thing was very personal. That was when I was growing up, seeing my father being jailed during Cultural Revolution for 7 years, and how I lived through it without his income. And my mother was being a stay-home mom and had to take care of 4 little girls and a husband who she didn't even know was alive or dead or somewhere. So, and then just as I graduated from college with an English degree with all my ambitions, my father was sent to prison again and sentenced to 7 years for being for Cultural Revolution. And I felt very powerless all my life because he was my father. I loved him. He was such an honest man and did such great things. I mean, just, growing up, seeing the wonderful deeds, how he helped people, doing great things. And how would it be possible that poor man went to jail twice, each for about 7 years for being for and being against the same thing. And of course, growing up, I almost felt that I had a wish. Either I would become a very powerful, influential people to help to, regain my father's name, or I should have married to someone who was so powerful and would be able to help me to do that. And in the end, I couldn't fulfill that wish. And suddenly, the 2 wishes, essentially people say that killing like 2 birds with 1 stone. I love birds, so I hate that expression. But in a sense, I would never do that. But in a sense, I felt that having 2 lost causes and combined ended up becoming one of my best wishes that fulfilled.
Yes. Wow. When you were talking about your childhood, Qin, I got goosebumps just listening to that. So, in the UnLost Cause shows, I like to talk about childhood because oftentimes our dreams, our lost causes that become unlost stem from childhood, right? So you talked about your father being arrested at 7. So I do want to get to that. But before that, what were some of the memories, that early memories you had about childhood that influenced, who you became growing up?
Well, the earliest, the memory is remembering my mother telling me. My mother actually was always treating me as a friend. She would tell me everything, and whether it's a positive for her to be a mother to tell the kid or not, but she has no reservation. She had. And so I learned that I was born into a shanty town and very close to the old French Quarter in Shanghai. And it was an upside down wooden box my father built against his parents' little upside down wooden box. And so we had nothing. And the floor was dirt, made of dirt. And the roof was made of very thin tin, like construction material. So if you had a rain or anything, things would fall onto the tin roof. And essentially, you are just listening to an orchestra playing. And it's quite dramatic, which I described in my book as being a child. And so that's the earliest memory was walking around and having roaming roosters and chickens and the rats and the wild cats among the rocks. And then they were my playmates in a sense because they were at my eye level. The grown-ups were too tall. And in the shanty town, everybody had clothes washed in a communal water tab and then hanging over a rope and the bamboo rods and just flying like international flags. So, and the entertainment was amazing. Because my father just collected random pieces of wood and nailed them together. So in between the wood, there are slots that you can see outside what was happening. So as a little child, I always had my favorite people. And if you hear something going on outside, there was a commotion, my mother would never let us out. She would always keep us in this tiny little room, even if it was hot, like a steam oven, like a sauna. So I would always go to my favorite people and see if I could find out what was going on outside. So that was my earliest childhood memory.
And then, Qin, there was 4, you and 3 sisters. Where were you were you the oldest, the youngest, or where were you in that order?
Oh, I love Little Women by Louisa May Alcott because in the book, there was 4 little women in a little family. And the father went away because he was like in the army, not like my father. My father was in the prison. So the second girl was named Jo, and I was the Joe in my family. So when I read that book, I was in love with it. And eventually I gained my own copy of Little Women. I always keep it in my night table, even to this day, because it's kind of I almost felt that I gained a mirroring family all the way in America, even though we didn't even grow up in the same, age in the same time. When I my husband was so kind and took me when we went all the way to like Massachusetts and up there. He took me to see where she was buried. And it was very, very moving and special for me because we lived in very different times, in different places. And yet I felt Jo was me, as if Louisa May was writing about a character. And that was me helping my mother. My father was not there, had 3 other sisters that I had to take care of. Anyway, I felt like I had to protect everyone growing up.
And then, yeah, the similarities are uncanny. And when you think about your father first being arrested, I believe you were 7, right? What was he, you just wake up and he's gone, or was there like discussion between him and your mom and then a series of events and that was that led up to it? Or is it very sudden and there's no time for you as a family to prepare for that?
It was during the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution lasted for 10 years in China. The so-called for the rest of the world, it was behind the bamboo curtains. And our family, it was in 1968 when he was first arrested and taken away. Of course, he disappeared suddenly, but the whole country was in fast commotion. Imagine it was a cascade of water tumbling down rough stones, the type of natural scene, but in real life, in our society. And so one day, my mother just said to me, we better find where your father is because he was taken away. He was taken away in his workplace. So as a child, my mother essentially took me everywhere she went in search of him because she had a bad eyesight. And my oldest sister inherited bad eyesight from my mother. So my mother treated me as her pair of eyes. So she would take me, even though emotionally I was a child. It was very, very scary. And I would just follow her to places. If I see her cry, if I saw something, like I described in my book, once I found my mother and me, when we went and we found our father and how he was being abused verbally and the extreme thunderous voices screaming at him, and he was like a little tiny bird crouched in the middle. We couldn't even see him, but we could hear what was going on. And then they would say to him, you don't admit, you are anti-Mao, you're anti our socialist country, and you better confess for the sake of your wife and child. And then they would show their hand toward and then that's when I saw my father because they opened up a little gap. And so my father could see my mother and me. And that's when I felt how serious it was because I was in school. I went to school when I was 6, so I was about 3 years old. And seeing the man, my father was a very strong man. He was very handsome too. I inserted a lot of the old family photos in my book, Once Our Lives. And so seeing him crouched in the middle, so helpless. And there was a man whom I called father, who could my father was so strong. I mean, he would take us to buy watermelons, and it was gigantic watermelon, almost the size of me. He would just pick it up with one hand, place it on his shoulder, and we would all hand up on him, holding his arms and legs and swinging around. And it's so victorious going home because it was so, in the summertime, we were so poor. Having watermelon, it was like in heaven because I knew what my father would do. He would put a watermelon in a bamboo basket and then tie a rope on it, and he would lower it to a well behind our house and leave it for a few hours. And I would be dreaming, oh, when is the watermelon ready? Because when it came out, it would be so cool. And he would just chop it and just display it in the middle of the table. And we could eat for a poor family who was constantly starving, eating watery rice. Now you could have anything. You could have all you can eat. Was a wonderful feeling. So
Yeah. So then that just sounds like so I can't even imagine what it's like when your father's gone for 7 years and you and your sisters and your mother are going through that. Were you able to rely on other relatives, or was it very siloed and only basically at that time the four girls plus the mom, so 5 women are together?
it's very sad. In any social situation, there is a particular group of people who's being accused of anything. The rest disappeared. I felt
Because they don't
that
want to be associated, right?
I
And
felt like I was an exposed stone, just like a little family, 4 little girls and my mother. We were left alone, and all the relatives essentially disappeared. One of my father's sisters, the youngest one, my grandmother came to our house and said she didn't want to have anything to do with you guys anymore. So she has denounced her own brother. And so they've taken, so it was scary. Well, we had nothing. My mother once looked at me and said, if we're starving to death right now, nobody would ever know. And I was 7, 8 years old. Look at her serious face, knowing that our rice pot was empty and we did not have a penny coming into the house. I literally thought that I would die with all my sisters and my mother and starve to death, and no one would know. And you can walk anywhere. My father's old colleagues, you have your neighbors, they would as if you're a ghost, no one can see you. They would walk by And in their field of vision, you do not exist. And that was very scary as a child and very, very traumatic, that I felt as if that my life for 8 years was a dream, because I may not really have any relatives. I may not really know these people. Maybe I just suddenly landed like Dorothy, into the arms. I did not know anyone. So we were on our own. We had to figure out how to live and everything on our own. But my mother is my hero. She's the most resourceful woman. And thank heavens that when she went, she did raise us in shantytown initially, but my mother came from a very well-to-do family in the old Shanghai. So she had things to sell. One by one, everything, all her old memories just departed from her for a few pennies and a dollar. So she could buy us some rice, and we could live for the day or two and then figure out the next day or two. And that was, in crisis, life, I've learned one thing big time from my childhood, that when life is in crisis, in a critical mode, you never try to think about like what I'm going to do in a month, in a year. Oh, I wish to do this in a year. You do it from day to day. That's it. But you can dream. I was always a dreaming child, a dream about the better days ahead, but you do not know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And it sounded like you had to be able to cope and, to have some hope to look forward to different things and moving forward. And then when your father came back, Qin, what was that like? And how long did he stay before he got jailed again?
Oh, the first time he came back, actually, it was pretty scary. There was this, tricycle. In the old days, we didn't have any taxi. We didn't have anything besides a bicycle. You have a bicycle hooked up with a little, like a three-wheeled little cart in the back. And if you really needed help, like a pregnant woman needs to go to a hospital, stuff like that, you call for one of those carts, and you can put someone in the back and they would carry you to places. And someone knocked on the door all of a sudden. And I remember it was summertime because we were not in school and we could not leave the house. So we usually hang out in a tiny little yard. And the door opened, my mother opened the door, and these people looked like totally mad and crazy. They dragged my father out from their cart. My father looked so skinny, as if he hadn't eaten for days. His face was gray and white, and he couldn't walk. Two men carried him, one arm on his other side, like a sack of potatoes, and threw him on our bed, and they left. And only then we realized that he contracted acute hepatitis from the jail. Apparently, he told us later on that next door to his cell, there was this man who had acute hepatitis. And he was so sick, they had to take him back home. And instead of cleaning that cell, they felt that it was a great idea to throw my father into it. So he could get weak, and he may confess that of the horrible things, like there was a cat drowned, and because cat is a mouse, and a great leader is a mouse. So anyone would kill cat means you wanted to kill Mao Zedong, so you're anti-revolutionary. And there was also there were giant portraits of Mao Zedong hanging in their dining hall, and someone pushed the pin too close to Mao's face. So they wanted my father to admit several of those things. And my father was like, I didn't do these things. And he was an honest man. He would not admit those things. And they figured if he got weaker, he may admit them. But my father wouldn't until he got really, really sick, like that man previously jailed in that room. And he was taken back home having like one breath left. And my mother had to find a way out to save him. And we managed to save him. Only good thing came out of this because he was out of jail. So his company paid him a wage. So he never made a lot of money. He was like a handyman type of construction worker. The only reason they did all the horrible things to him was because he was representing the union, the workers' union. And so whatever the workers wanted to say, he listened to the workers because the workers loved him so much. And he said, okay, you be our head. You represent our voice. And that got him into all the trouble in the world.
So miraculously, you are able to nurse him back to health. And so but then you say that he gets thrown in jail again.
Well, as soon as he got better, they were so happy.
Oh,
When he
wow.
was horribly sick, they sent, I didn't know my father could be so important. They actually had 2 men stationed in the back of our house because they were smoking cigarettes. So we could smell, we could detect. And they wanted to make sure they could see who it was visiting him. So nobody dared to come to our house because they knew our house had actually, surveillance. And as soon as he got better, he was thrown into jail again. And to a point, sometimes he would come home and he would be thrown back into jail again. I grew up knowing my mother had a bedroll placed on the side in anticipation that it would be coming to taking my father. Because if they're coming, she's not ready to give him anything, then he would have to go with nothing. So my mother would have a change of clothes, a towel, a bed, and rolled it together and tied up together, put on the side, just so that in case they're coming for him, and she would just give it to him, like, okay, at least let him take this along with him. So that was the kind of situation. It lasted for 7 years until about 1975. And, when Nixon visited Shanghai, signed the Shanghai Communique, my father was jailed about a block or 2 away from the Jinjiang Hotel where Nixon stayed. So my father was really happy at the time, thought China was going to open up and the world was going to change. And politically, economically, he was holding so much wishes and desire that someone would say, hey, sorry for getting into all the trouble. And here's the wage we own you. But it never happened.
And then, Qin, you sought a lot of refuge and solace in books. And you mentioned that you were the school librarian, and then that gave you access to some unique books. Was that in China, or what age were you became the school librarian or helped out the school librarian where you started getting even more access to books?
In high school, I was always afraid of words because I felt that my father said the wrong words, that it got him into all the trouble. I was a great student, but most, education they give to us were mouse quotations. They were we literally went to school. All we needed was carrying the little red book bag. And so I felt that if they wanted to write an essay or do anything, I would just put into quote Mao's words or Karl Marx's words, then I wouldn't be in trouble. Because if they say there's anything wrong, like they said it, I didn't say it. But I loved reading. So in high school, I was in Shanghai, number 51st high school. At that time, the whole system was like the Russian system. So all hospitals, department stores, school systems, they're all numbered. There was no name. Everything was numbered. Mine was number 51st high school of Shanghai. The school was originally a missionary school. It was built by the missionaries. So we actually had an old style library and had all the chemistry labs. Everything was red wood paneled. It's like dark wood paneled with a wooden staircase in the middle going upwards. Now, the classrooms it was like more recently built, like 5-story concrete buildings, but we had this gorgeous library, but kids, nobody wanted to study. They were having a great time, just boys being bullies and girls just laughing and talking and having a snack in class. Nobody was doing much. But I found the schooling, no matter what I was studying, it was the only time that I could be a child. I didn't have to worry about my father, my mother. At that particular time, I just could focus on whatever I was studying. And I love that. And I wanted to read more books. My mother couldn't afford to give me any books besides what we had. So I volunteered to be a librarian. And it was wonderful because we had a lot of dust-covered books, all in Chinese mostly. And no one came to borrow any books. So I just find a few books and just crouched on the floor and just read. and for like an hour, 2 hours, whatever my shift was. And I usually insert a tiny little piece of paper in there, place my book in a particular place, and then I leave. And next time it was my shift, I could continue reading. So it was a lot of fun. I really had a great time being a librarian. And I believe all the reading helped me to always get A's. I always tried to be the best student in class because that was my only pride. And otherwise, I was a raggedy doll, with patches on my elbows, on my knees. Sometimes my mother had no money and no time to make me new shoes, so my toes would stick out, and she just would have put a patch on it. So I didn't look very decent, and most of the kids didn't want to be my friends, except they all knew that I had the best grades and I was a good student. So whenever it was a test time, they all fought to sit next to me so they could copy my answers.
And then, so that's amazing. So you're finding time to feed yourself through these books as a volunteer librarian, and then getting close to the end of high school, and you eventually go to college. But was that preordained? Is that something you thought for sure I'm going to go to college, or did you think about working or doing something else? Tell me what was going through like your decision making. And also, you're the second. Did your older sister go to college too and set that example?
Well, I will tell you that I am a very lucky person. My older sister was 2 years older than I was. So when we actually shared one teacher, like in charge of the classes. And I went to that teacher and I begged her. I said, "You're my teacher too. And I swear on my words that I will go to the countryside. I will do the farming. Let my sister go to get a factory, like stay in the city of Shanghai and work." And I said, she is so nearsighted. My mother, when I was growing up, my mother would always say, the poor child, she couldn't even tell a rope from a snake. You know what I mean? Because she was very nearsighted. So I said to the teacher, I said, she couldn't even tell a snake from a rope. I said, I would go. And imagine, I was 14, 15 years old, and I understood how serious it was. So when it was my time to graduate, about, when I was what you call a junior high school, and she actually pointed my nose and said, well, you are definitely going to the countryside. China was changing. In 1975, Mao Zedong passed away, and again of four, his wife, and along with a few people that were the core of the Cultural Revolution, all got arrested. China essentially had an internal coup, and Deng Xiaoping took over the main job, and he decided ambitiously, in order to build China, move China forward, he needed intellectuals. So he wanted to start a thing called National Entrance Examination for College. This thing is actually almost the same version of what happened during the dynasty days in China. China traditionally always respected individuality. So the emperor every year would have a national entrance examination, and they would call for anyone who is smart to go to the capital of their city or to go to the capital of the country to take this multi-day examination. Now, no matter who you were, you could be a peasant, you could be poor, but if you can ace that test, the emperor would appoint you to become the provincial officials, or you could even become the prime minister, the private advisor to the emperor himself. So it was very, very exciting. Suddenly, my fate changed. I had about 1 year to prepare, to get ready for that entrance examination. And also was my great luck and fortune, one of our friends' mother-in-law who came to our house and needed my father's help for fixing something, since my father was very good at fixing everything. She came in and she's like, oh, 4 cutest little girls. She was giggling. She wanted to be a grandma, even though she had her own grandchildren. And she used to be a Shanghai radio station narrator. And her husband was a professor of English in one of the Shanghai universities. She said to me, she said, come to my house, ask your grandpa to teach you English. So I went there to this fancy apartment in the old French Quarter. And they live on the 7th floor. I had to take an elevator all the way up there. And I saw all these people coming and go, taking classes from my grandpa. And they were all, one like woman, her father in Shanghai invented the joint, the arms, the broken arms and stuff. He was a bone doctor, very, very famous. And there were all these people wearing army uniforms, and people look very dignified, young people or middle-aged people going there for English classes. And there I was, a little raggedy person, a tiny, like a 16, 17 years old. And I was so nervous. But Grandpa was such a kind gentleman. He tested my English ability the first class, and then I would go back once a week and receive classes from him for free. Later, I knew everybody paid him. I was the only unpaid student. And after going through the college exam, none of his students got into as good a school as I did, because I did so well in my test. I was accepted by Shanghai Institute of Foreign Languages, and now it's called Shanghai, I think, a University for International Studies. It has a gorgeous campus now, but it was the second best language college in China. Beijing had the best one. Shanghai has the second best one. And we belong to the foreign ministry. The school trained foreign diplomats for the Chinese government. And I got into that school. And my grandma, she treated me so well. She even delivered a stack of fabric to my mother. She said, now this child is going to a real school. You better make her some decent clothes. So that's how people helped me. Like, they were my guardian angels. They actually helped me. And from then on, I became tourism developed in China, international tourism. All the Americans swarmed into China in the 1980s. So I became a tour guide for American tourists. I met the mayor of San Francisco at the time, Dianne Feinstein, and her husband in Shanghai for the American Book Foundation donation to the Shanghai Music Conservatory. And I was the interpreter there. I received the American Navy warships in late 1980s as they paid a visit to Shanghai City and Shanghai Harbor for the first time ever in the communist China. I was with the pioneer correspondents of the U.S. Navy, and I took the U.S. Navy soldiers around. I still remember one warship named the Blue Ridge. That one I remember. I believe someone told me that it's stationed in San Diego, possibly. But I met tons of sailors, and I took them around. And I was the narrator for the Shanghai acrobatic show that night, specially performed for the entire U.S. Navy fleet. So I did a lot of things. I actually escorted Stanford Alumni Association tours, toured over the Yangtze River, and I was their national guide and used to give them lessons on Chinese agriculture, Chinese education, whatever they wanted. I was just sitting in this big, like a meeting room and talking to them.
So it sounds like you're very successful in college and you graduated and you're doing, extremely well doing interpretation and doing tours at very high and prestigious levels. What sparked you to want to, go to America? Was it to continue studying, or was it just to immigrate?
I don't think I was coming here for immigration. It was for 7 years how the American student or the tourists told me, said, you're so smart. I used to recite them Shakespeare's sonnets, William Wordsworth, Longfellow, all the different sonnets. I love the Psalm of Life from Longfellow. And they would say, you're so smart, you're beautiful. Why don't you come to America? America would love you. But I was working. At time, my father went to the prison for the second time for full Cultural Revolution. It was in 1982 when I graduated from college. So I took over my father's job, essentially being a father for the family. I was the only breadwinner for the family. My sister, the older sister, had made very little money, couldn't have done it. So I worked for 7 years, and then my father came back in April 1989. I told him, I said, I took care of the family when he was not home. I wanted to leave to see the world because I was 29. I knew that if I didn't go anywhere, my life would, just settle down and that's it. That would be the end of my life. I felt I went through so much. Might as well, what's the point after all I've gone through from a upside down wooden box and to going through all the revolution, the famine, everything. And I almost died when I was a child because people wanted to kill our family. And I want to see the world. I want to see beyond China. I want to see where these people come from, what the life is. My mother came from a very high class family. She had a lot of cousins overseas. So one of her cousins did a sponsorship for me. And so he helped me to get my passport. And I applied for a college and I left for United States because I wanted to see the world. I did not know what was going to happen to me. I took 2 suitcases and not much more by myself. And I didn't even know if I could, I could study there because I'd never been in American education system before. And my English was mostly, 100% the English that I studied on pages. Talk with foreigners that traveling in China. I never left the country before. So it was kind of a big, big gambling. And I was so nervous I couldn't eat that day. Everybody's like, oh, you're so brave. I'm like, no, I was so nervous. I could not eat anything. I literally left China with an empty stomach, went on the plane. I'm like, where I'm going, I don't really know anyone there. My mother's cousin, my mother met him when she was a child. And they're all old people now. I'm like, what am I going to do there? But I did it anyhow. So
that's remarkable. And then so you fly to the US, and what was it like? I would imagine your mom's cousin greeted you, at least I think that's the case, or you can tell me. And then what was the initial time period like for you?
Well, luckily I have a lot of friends. So I went to Manhattan with some other friends. And I did go and visit my mom's cousin and his wife. They invited me to stay for a week, so I stayed. It's an apartment on Park Row in the heart of Chinatown, a tall building like 19 stories high, and they have an apartment all the way up there. But it was a small apartment, so I literally slept on their living room floor for a week. And my uncle had a restaurant called Mandarin Pale on 34 Pale Street. So he went to work and I would follow him to go to work. And my aunt, and I also spent time with my aunt, and they actually became very successful. And all their children, his son actually graduated from Harvard University Law School. So they were immigrants. The reason he wanted to help me was because he was my grandfather's sister's child. My grandfather, my birth grandfather, my mother's birth father, was an first mate of ocean-going freighters and died during the Pacific War. But my grandfather took him to the ship and sailed across the ocean. And my uncle actually decided he wasn't going back to the ship, and he stayed behind. So he was very close. He knew a lot about my grandfather, about grandmother, even knew about my mother's adopted grandfather and the mother as well, because both of my mother's mothers were cousins. My 2 grandmothers shared one grandmother. So the 2 grandmothers, actually, their mothers were sisters, essentially, right? Because they shared the same grandmother. So that uncle knew everyone, and he told me a lot of stories. I learned about how my grandfather, the ocean, on the ocean-going freighters, also had a brother, which I did not even know. And he died, he perished over the ocean, had a water barrier because you died of sickness, they just threw you overboard. So I learned a lot of different things about the past as well. And I kept a relationship with them until they died. They died all in their mid to late 90s. And I have very fond memory of them. But I did not rely on them for anything, especially financially, because I saw how, Chinese families, even though they did really well and sent all their kids to college, getting doctorate degrees and become like a head nurse in Washington, D.C., the daughter, my aunt literally did the laundry in their bathtub. And she told me, she said she shrank my uncle's suit because she washed it in the bathtub. I'm like, come on. So I would not really wanted their money or anything. So
then when you arrive in Manhattan, you first tag along with your uncle to the restaurant. So it sounds like you're doing some restaurant work. And then how did you transition to, or did you, before we fast forward to the Lost Cause becoming an UnLost Cause and you started writing in your 40s? Like, what did you do when you're basically you came around your 30, that decade before you started writing?
Well, a lot happened. I never worked in a restaurant. He said, why don't you learn how to make cocktails? I'm like, what's cocktails? Because first of all, in Chinese, cocktail means called a ji. It means the chicken tail drink. I'm like, where's the chicken? Where's the tail? I had no concept. I did not understand drinks at all, and I wasn't interested in it. But I listened to him. I saw the dynamics in the restaurant, and 1 week went by really quickly. I went to University of Arizona, and I studied communications. I got my master's degree, and because what I studied it was about American family dynamics, about the politics. We studied Michael Dukakis versus Ronald Reagan presidential campaign. We studied teamwork, how organization communications and management. Anyway, I did all these things and I became the first foreign student ever graduated from that program because being a foreigner had no idea about American society, and you dive into it and try to analyze it, figure it out. But I managed to do it. Some days I would study until 3 a.m. I would do it, and my paper got into the conference, and I was too poor to attend it, and all the different things. But when I graduated, I went to Manhattan, and I got a job in the fashion industry, and the company gave me a work visa, and they had a business in Shanghai. So it was great. And I fell in love with a young man from Juilliard, a trained concert pianist, a wonderful romantic man. So he's now my husband. So we were together, 2 kids who were poor kids, and neither of us had any money, but we were romantically kind of in love. And at the time when I had a work visa, United States government gave all the Chinese a right to stay in America. So since I was in love with American young men, and I felt that I should accept it and stay in America. And I stayed in America, raised a family, since I didn't have any relatives and people around. So I had to stay home. I quit my job. I stayed home and eventually had 2 children. And what happened was, I want to fast forward it, that it was in my 40s. You imagine in the middle of the night, the worst nightmare. I'm still afraid of phone calls. If someone calls me like middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning, it freaks me out because phone rang. I pick up the phone on my nightstand. Like, who is it? It was my father's voice. He was in one of my friend's house. He said, I'm at your friend's house and I know they have a phone because we didn't have a phone at the time. Your mother is dying. We just trying to figure out, and apparently found out that she had a 3rd stage ovarian cancer. You better come back home, and we have no money. We can't take him to the hospital, keep her in the hospital for long. We need money. We need help. So I went to China and I had 5 minutes to convince the doctor because I did this thing. It's like as if I'm going to see a specialist, but I wasn't going to see. I didn't have any problem to see the specialist. I took my mother's patient record with me and I showed the doctor because that doctor was in charge of the surgery department in the Madame Jingling's hospital. And I had 5 minutes to convince her why she had to save my mother. I understood that no surgeon wanted to do a surgery on someone who is at a death door. And both of us were in tears when I finished the 5 minutes of talk, a monologue. She said she will consider it. And I went back to America. And a week later, my older sister told me that the doctor came to my mother's ward and told her that she would operate on my mother. That kind of saved her for about 3.5 years. And during which I had my daughter, I went back and forth from China. Imagine having a snuggling, taking an infant, going back for a week or two. Then I had to come back to the United States again because my husband had a job. He was holding up the family financially, and I have a little son and had nobody to take care of them. I couldn't bring my son to China. He was in school. And plus, who was going to take care of the little kids? My mother was sick, very, very sick. So anyway, of course, during the 3.5 years, my mother was horribly sick. And in the middle of the night, of course, my older sister called me. My father died. And then about a year later, my mother died. So I was always heading home for funerals and seeing the sick parents. When my mother finally died, that's when I broke down because my mother and I were so close. I was her seeing eyes. I knew everything since the age of 7. What went through the family, and I lost her, and I never was going to see her ever again. And at that time, suddenly occurred to me, the funny thing was, who taught me that was my little boy. He is now, he graduated from MIT and Johns Hopkins for a doctorate degree. But now, at that time, he was a little boy. He said to me, he said, "Mom, you can never lose them. If you go to sleep and you can dream about them, and they will be just like alive, like real." Now, it was a desperate comfort from a little boy to his mother. But I said to myself, if I think back, if I dig into our past, I can see my parents again. I can see what we kind of going through, what we went through. But I also realized it was extremely painful to go back to that period of time. But my love conquered my fear. I cried my eyes out. I thought about all those different things. And that's when the two lost causes came together.
Wow. And when those leading up to that, those two lost causes, about one is writing a book, given your love of reading, but you just thought it was out of reach for you, or, it's like privileged air. And then the second is around your family and clearing the name. Did that always kind of smolder in the background? And when then you had quick succession of your dad passing and the mom passing, it like boom, it just like flamed up? Or was that voice getting louder and louder and louder, and then it just tipped over with the passing of your parents in quick succession? Was it fast or is it slow?
Well, the two lost causes were of different magnitude. That my father's situation, I felt that I could never clear his name. I have regrets, like, why didn't I become more powerful? Why couldn't I become a super girl who earned myself a social position in America and could actually ask some influential people to go and clear his name or something? Or I can become, so important, people would pay attention to me. That was when my father died, knowing that his name could never be cleared was the worst feeling that I had. Now, I always had so much envy for those people who can write. I could recite all these poems, even including Robert Burns. Yet, somehow, I felt that I could never write. I think that I did not give myself enough credit. You know that until the age of 29, I was a Chinese citizen living in China, spoken Chinese. English was just my foreign language. And so, of course, I never really thought about, like, I could write in Chinese. It's just a foreign language to me. But when suddenly I realized that I felt that I wanted to honor my parents. I wanted to let the whole world know who these honorary people were and what extraordinary things they went through, their lives were. So suddenly occurred to me as if I needed my language skill to pave that way to clear my father's name. at least in a court of literature, in a court of words, in a court of public opinion, that I felt that I wanted to do it. I know that I can't do it in a court of law. And most of the people who did horrible things to my father are dead. If anybody's still alive, would probably be 90 years old. So I really felt, and another thing is, I felt that it was a very important historical period of time. I did not know that I went through such an important period of time, that the world had a little knowledge about what went on there. I felt that I would do the world some service and tell them what was it like if people could step into our shoes and go through it and understand what we went through. The world would truly give them a historical inside look. Now, there are tons of books on China, extremely popular, and people like read those books and they feel like they know about China. But you mind us all, China is not about the top leaders. China is about average people. So it's like America or the rest of the world, all the countries. It's about average people, that we are the little carpenter ants who are building the society. And I wanted people to know what really was happening. And so I felt that everything just was in place.
So, Qin, you said that I could not let their stories be buried with their bones. And that was very powerful for me when I was reading that and letting that soak in. So when you took on the goal to write this memoir and honor and clear their name, what was the process? Was it just flying out of your brain and it was just like super easy and you just couldn't stop writing? Or was it very hard because you're so emotional and you're having to flash back and almost relive that it's just like hard to write one chapter to the other chapter?
Well, I think for most people who would have any lost cause, I think this reason is because they're difficult to tackle. If it would be easy, like a stamp collection or go take a tennis lesson, people probably would have done it a long time ago. They become lost causes because they're challenges. And are we afraid of our challenges? Or maybe we're too busy to handle some extra things and just left in the back burner. So then eventually it will become lost causes. It was hard. I did not actually know until I started to write, that having Chinese as my first language, I was incapable of typing and thinking at the same time. You imagine when I was trying to think about the stories, things my mother told me, I went through, and come back to my life. And I do have a fantastic memory. It's like pictures would come back into my head. And I remember all the colors on my clothes and things like, but if I was thinking and I did not know where my fingers would go on the on the keyboard. So that was the first alarming thing that came to me. And so what I did was I started to use little notebooks and a pen. And I also had little children, so I didn't really have time to sit behind a machine and try to spend a lot of time on it. So I started to write little stories. I started to remember every chapter was like a little story to me. I started to recall my life. I did go back again and again to retrieve my stories, to retrieve my parents' stories and their lives. And that's how I started my writing. When I first got my first draft and look at a pile of stories, and I said that to some other writing groups as well, I felt that I had a collection of swatches. They're not exactly connected, but they're all somehow a little bit of random. They're connected, but also random. And I just thought, like, if I want to put it into a book, how am I going to thematically to string them together as if I'm making a necklace or as if I am making a patchwork of a quilt? And I thought about, in New England, that how people do the quilting with different fabrics, they actually make it into a theme. And each quilt is more beautiful than the, and I'm like, maybe I can put those stories together and make them into a book, which I did.
Yeah, and then Ching, share with the Unlost Cause audience, like when you first started and wrote the first words of the book or the stories to when it was published, how much time elapsed?
First time I started write the first word to the time the book was published, it took me 20 years. 20 years. When I got my book together during that 20 years, I became a newspaper columnist. I became a poet. I became a storyteller. I started to write tall tales, short stories, everything, because I felt that it was a way of training myself that every month I have to write a column. I have to think about, and, for the Santa Monica Star, about how to write an essay somewhere 700 words, sometimes 300 words. Every month I have to do it. And it's a training for me at the same time as I was working on my book. And also I felt that they're like artists who want to have a masterpiece. They always would do sketches. They would do little drawings and little poems and little short stories. They are wonderful, wonderful experiments about how to write about an incident, how to write about the one little story, or like a poem, just describe a particular flower or little things. And so I felt that it's my way. It was my way of practicing at the same time as I pushed forward. And many times I thought my book could never be published because only funny thing is only after I finished the book, and a lot of people love that book. And when I showed it to them, then I realized, because when I got the feedback, they would always say, like, we want memoirs from famous people, and you're not a known person. So if you're not a known person, nobody would buy your memoir. Who would want to know about your life because you're just too ordinary? They did not understand ordinary people could do extraordinary things. Think about Jen's diary. Helen Keller was not really famous. She did it through her deeds of being a blind woman to conquer all the difficulties. So, but yet the world had a little room for us ordinary people. That was very disappointing.
So then, Ching, it took you 2 decades, right? So I think one of the things that I always share with the Unlost Cause community is there's never a straight line. There's like life turns and detours, and each one is a refinement, an opportunity to learn, and hopefully take that next step closer to turning that lost cause into unlost cause. So in this perspective, for 2 decades, you're working on this masterpiece and on your craft. Was there ever any doubt that you were going to finish this book?
I'm always a very stubborn person, thinking about where I came from, how much I have gone through. So I knew one thing, I wasn't going to go giving up until the last day, my last breath. I would be working on it. So that much I did know, but I did not know how long it would take. But I've learned so many famous writers, their first story, how many times they got rejected in so many, many ways. So I just kept like, okay, my husband, Mark, he is always so supportive. And he would say to me, he said, well, just one more no. So there would be a fewer no's coming your way. So there would be yes closer to you. So I felt that I was very lucky. I always had a support and I wasn't alone.
And then, Ching, in that 20 years, did you finish the book, let's say in year 18, and it took 2 years to convince a publisher to pick it up? Or did you take all 20 years and then within the year you've finished it, a publisher picked it up?
Well, it took me about 10 to 12 years to finish the book, just because it was so painful to record the stories. Essentially, it was like giant psychotherapy session I had with myself, for myself, that I dug it and I felt that it was like climbing the emotional Everest that I had to do. But once I got to the top of it, I felt I was at ease. I felt that I could understand why things happened the way they happened. So I felt that no matter what, this actually was so important in my life. I think a lot of times it's like, okay, it's lost cause, it's never going to happen, bye. But when you start to tackle it, you actually become stronger, wiser. You're going to see a view of things you would never have envisioned yourself seeing. And which was something that I only realized after all this time. And then I queried for an agent. Then I tried to search for a publisher. And then eventually getting the publisher, and it took an extra 2-3 years to get the book edited, the cover, whatever, the final approval and whatever, and then launch the book. So it is a daunting task. But the funny thing is, I feel I want to share everyone my perspective, which is, as children, we were all very brave. Every human being is brave. Can you imagine a child never clawed for the first time, never walked the first time, never tasted something, and had to do that first deed? We didn't realize how brave and strong we were as infants, as little kids, doing the things for the first time. Now, as we grow older, are we getting softer? We somehow feel like, oh, we just want to do things that we're so used to. We're so know what we're doing. And we automatically are doing it because we feel comfortable. I think we should always tempt, as if we are always keep a certain innocence with us. Keep that question why, keeps that endearing thing. Have you done one thing today that you never done before? Keep it going. It's inside us as a human being. We are stronger than we think we are. And everything we do, they will become stepping stones for you to move forward. You don't jump from one point to another. You really don't in life. It's easier to see people like jumping off the cliff with this giant suit and flying oh, it looks so easy. They also had to prepare themselves for that moment. But mostly we do little things in order to fulfill a bigger moment.
So you said the book took 10 to 12 years to finish, and then you felt this calm and at ease, I think was the phrase that you shared. So it feels like you've conquered that already. Why was it so important to get it published? And why was it then so important to get it published through a mainstream publisher versus self-publishing? Because I feel like part of it's just you did for you and your family by just completing that. But then why was it so important to get it published and then by a actual publishing house versus self-publish?
I felt that I needed to, if I want to truly let the world know who my parents were, I need to have that audience. Without that audience, I can't have a court. I'm being chairing that court of justice for my parents. I need all my readers to come in to fill my court with their ears, with their eyes. Now, if I just self-publish it, well, I'm going to sell it to my friends, family. That's not going to work. My husband and I using our life savings to travel, to enterprises, to give out the books to those who are willing to read it, all because we wanted the book to reach out. And by now, after this being 2 years, the book's been published for 2 years, my book has entered hundreds of libraries in the United States and around the world, as far away as Hong Kong, Singapore, Turkey, many, many countries in Europe and in Canada and everywhere. And I'm trying to get my book into universities as educational course. And we are doing every way we can to get the book out there, let people know this is the real life. This is not fiction. People somehow read historical fiction, feel like, okay, I know what the people were like in the old days. No, fictional stories have certain limitations. It's the same thing as you read Anne's diary. Anne went through it. It's not these you just read a few sentences. It looks like, oh, it's exciting, but it should be more exciting. Where's another twist? No, life gives you all the twists it gave to you. And I want all the people out there to read my book, to understand this is serious business. This is what life was like for a period of time, for about 100 years in China. and how generations of Chinese went through the prejudice, all these cultural superstitions and various things. That is history. And that is the reason why I could not compromise. I have to write the way it was written.
Yeah. And then how did you feel when you got that letter that a publisher says, Qin, we love your book and we want to publish it?
Almost felt a little bit numb, almost felt it's like a delayed reaction. Is it for real? Is it the moment to finally hear? You mean I don't have to be agonized anymore to send any more queries and talk to more people about my potential book? I feel like it's final. It's here. The moment is here. I cannot believe my eyes. Is it real? They kind of someone pinch me. Tell me it's real.
Mm-hmm. But it also then you feel this numbness and about, hey, pinch me if it's real. But you also mentioned that the reason why you wanted to do a publisher is you wanted this public audience to witness in your court what happened, to almost be justice or clear the family's name. So was it just like, okay, I checked off that major box, but my goal is really to get it now? That's just the gate I had to go to then open it up to more people to really come in, read it, and understand?
Yeah, my job is not over. This book, Once Our Lives, is now my baby officially. I've given birth a 20-year pregnancy. And finally, you don't give up your children. Your child is here. Guess what? My son is 31. He's still my baby. My daughter is 27. She's still my baby. I would do anything to keep it going. It's like my husband said, you know, your own children, you all have to pay college education. This book baby, I'm not paying the book baby any college education, but I will be paving the way forward for its prosperity, for it to go into the world. So I try every way I can. I'm out there talking to people. I attend book clubs, you know, whether on through Zoom or, you know, attending in person if it's locally. And I go to talk, you know, in bookstores. I talk with in the churches. I am going to spend the rest of my life as a mission, try to keep this book going. And, you know, I'm a writer now. So I am a journalist. I'm a writer. So I will be writing more books. And I don't intend, see now my lost cause has turned into my ambition, my pride, and it has turned into not just unlost cause, but it has paved my way forward. And I see where I'm heading. I will be writing. I will be, for as long as I live, I will be a writer.
Wonderful. And then, Qin, just for people who are fans of your writing, are you going to be writing something in the same ilk around nonfiction, kind of memoir-esque, or is it going to be more fiction, or what type of genre will it be?
I feel like being a child, experimenting with things. So I have already done a nonfiction and knowing how hard and how long it took me. So I have decided that I'm going to work. The next project is fictional. As a matter of fact, I've already finished my first draft. So as you can see, it didn't take me another 20 years. I feel that I'm 65. I don't have another 20 years to try to you know, publish a book. So I am fast, and I have created, you know, I really enjoyed creating that book. First, actually, I wrote about a short story about a girl from the countryside in China, little town, mining town, what she went through for being a girl, and how she ran away from home and how she ended up in a large city. Now, all the large cities in China have a migrant population, more doing supportive roles where they, you know, they would do maid service, they will clean your house, wash your clothes. The men would be doing construction, sanitation, and also delivery. So I wanted to explore the minds and lives of those people who left their small villages and towns and countryside, ended up in large cities, how their mindset versus the mindsets of the people in large cities, and also the young people versus the old people in large cities, how different their mentalities are, and how women in the countryside versus the city, young versus the old, how their lives are progressing in China. So I'm very, very happy. I love the little mid-level, like a mid-range. I wrote my short story, like, then it became like 6,000 words. I'm like, I really care for this girl so much. I wanted to see where she was going. So I decided to keep on writing. And I keep on writing to the point, and now it's actually a book. So now I have my first draft of my another book, and we will see how long that would take for me to query and find an agent or whatever. The whole process, it continues. It's just, but I say because of my lost cause becomes UnLost Cause, and now it becomes my cause. See, I shade all the prefixes and now actually have a
Yeah.
cause for life. So,
Yes.
so that's a kind of a,
Yeah. And then, so, you're a survivor. You've done amazing things. And, you told me, it's like, look, I've been through a lot. I'm finishing this book and, I can persevere. So how, now that you look back on the last 65 years, like finishing your first book, getting it out there and birthing that 20-year-old child, and then, having another one on the way, how has that changed how you see yourself? Or has it not really changed? And you always knew like, hey, I'm going to get this done. Or have you taken a step back and be able to let it kind of wash over you and say like, wow, I feel different, or my attitude towards myself is different?
it's difficult to say. On some level, I would say I do feel I enjoy that sense of success, but mostly it has not changed me. I mean, it's there's so many great books out there, and why is yours better than the others? So I'm a modest person. I would say there are a lot of wonderful books, a lot of great people out there, and I would always want to see what others are doing. And I'm just one of many, many people out there. But so I don't think I actually have changed much. I still go to the grocery store looking for the sale sign, even though I was, decades ago. I'm not starving. There are tons of food around, and I can afford to buy things that are not on sale. But yet I cannot change myself. If I see a grain of rice on the floor, I pick it up and look if there's any dust or dirt. I pop it right in my mouth because I could never forget how I was starving without that grain of rice, how my mother sold all her wonderful old past things just so that we would have a dinner for that night. So I could not really change myself. I mean, I would wear clothes and my clothes got worn, and then I use them for pajamas. And my husband would say, get a real set of pajamas. I'm like, I like soft cotton. I would always find excuses. And I just felt like, why do I need a special pajamas? I throw out these little bit of discolored, little old clothes right into the garbage. They're too old to be donated. They are not too old to be thrown out. So I like to have broken socks and use them as rags instead of using paper. And I'm saving a tree. I'm saving a tree. So that kind of attitude and mentality, I don't think I'm ever going to change. I will always be who I am. But it is wonderful sometimes to get recognition. And actually, just as we speak, last night, I received an email. I got shortlisted for the International Rubery Book Award, which is actually a rather
Congratulations.
prestigious international book award in England. And so things continue. And next week, I'm heading to Virginia for a book talk with a book club of ladies and talk about my book. And I feel that my life has obtained so much new meaning because of my lost causes to unlost to become my ambition and my life, a major part of my life. So everyone can do it. The main thing is just think about your past, whatever you've done, stepping stones to get to this point. And sometimes if you don't do it, it's like, it's your life. It's your one chance. Like, I don't believe I'm coming back here again. Even if you believe you're coming back here again. Why not enjoying this life? Well, do whatever you can. Do the maximum you can. Because if you don't do it, you're shortchanging yourself. You're shortchanging the world because you could have done something for the world, maybe one day to become greatly recognized. You don't really know.
And then, Qin, when you've gone to book clubs or book signings or speeches, or people reach out to you in social media or email after reading the book, do you have some very poignant feedback from a reader who says, oh my goodness, I read that book and it reminded me of this or that really touches you? And you're like, I'm so glad I did that. And that feedback was really meaningful to me.
So much so. I have women from Venezuela. I have women from Malaysia. I have women from Europe. After the book event, they come to me with tears in their eyes and say, thank you so much, because the wars and the famine and, chaos in the world that ordinary people had to go through, they are very, very similar. It's not about one country. It's about the humanity. And they said it in my book, Painstaking. It's just like reading about the Chinese history. They felt they're reading about their own lives, their family. I went to Pennsylvania not too long ago and spoke to a congregation, church, for a group of Latvians. And they was first Sunday, we were talking about my book. The second Sunday, they were talking about their own lives during the Russian occupation, and how they ended up in America, ended up in the labor camp in Germany, and all these different things. So I do believe that my book has a much bigger impact than I ever would have imagined.
Wow, that's fantastic. And then, are you proud of the book?
I think so. It's my proud baby. I feel that's why I cause the book. I have a dog. I cause the dog my baby and the book my baby. So I'm like, how many babies I have? I have 4 babies. If I can publish more books, I will have more babies. They don't have to be humans,
Yeah.
but they need your care. Your passion project is your baby. How much time you put in, how much effort you put in really affect the outcome. People think, oh, it's not going to work. If you don't put all passion, devotion, time into it, why do you think it's going to work? Of course it's not going to work. If you really care for it, gather your family, your friends, and speak to them. People may give you ideas and suggestions. Don't keep it buried in your chest and no one knows about it. Of course, it's gone, it's buried, it's lost.
And, one of the questions I always like to ask all guests is, for, let's say, someone who's listening here and they're like, wow, Qin, you're special. That's why you were able to, turn a lost cause into UnLost Cause. But I don't know, maybe older, I don't have the time, I may not have the finances to turn a lost cause into UnLost Cause. What would you say to someone who's in that situation?
Well, I would say do baby steps. You may have difficulties. I didn't have the time. I had 2 little children. My time was so full, but I managed to use a pen and a little pad, just writing down the ideas. Mind can work anytime. Before you go to sleep, when you wake up, the first thing, find ideas. Think about it. If you don't spend your time with the idea can never be developed. As far as money is concerned, there are a lot of free writing groups through libraries, through churches, locally. Find out, do I have a writing group in the area? Or if I'm interested is there a group of women in the church who you don't have to believe in the religion to go and join it. Join the group of women or men or photography, or you want to do just walking through the forest, identifying different strange beetles or anything, bird watching. Find supportive groups of people who share your passions, and you may discover a little mushroom that has never been found before. You may find a little tiny plant people did not know they still exist. There could be all sorts of things everywhere. The world is a fascinating place.
Yes. And then, Qin, for viewers who are definitely fascinated by what you shared today. How can they support, follow, or keep in touch with you on socials, newsletters, emails? Like where should they be turning to?
Well, first, I would be very, very grateful if you would join me in my little court and become a reader of my book. And you would be the jury to decide whether or not these people are courageous, they are good, and they shouldn't be punished. I would enjoy that. And my book is available on bookshop.org, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's everywhere, even overseas. I have people from Australia, Turkey, they even find my books. So, get my book, read it. You can go on my website, www.qinsunstubis.com, where you can read a free first episode. You can see the poems I published, the articles I published in New York Times, USA Today, Santa Monica Star, and all different places. And I would really appreciate it. And if you Google my name, Qin Sun Stubis, with a quote, in quote, I'm sure you will find a lot of articles and things are written about me. And you can connect with me because on my website, there's a contact me button where you can leave me a message and talk to me. And I promise you, I will write back.
Qin, thank you for showing us that buried stories still breathe and that even after decades of silence, truth can rise. You didn't just write a book, you honored your family, you restored a name, and lit a path for others to follow. Your UnLost Cause is a triumph of memory, meaning, and the power of never giving up. Thanks again, Qin.
Thank you so much, David. I really, really appreciate this opportunity today.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets, the UnLost Cause way, one story and one person at a time.